Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick here alongside Caroline Hyde, Taylor Riggs, counting you down to that closing bell. Here to help take us beyond the bell with our global simulcast team, Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, bringing together our Bloomberg Television, Radio, and YouTube audiences worldwide. Carol, another interesting day here, coming close, but not quite above record highs on the S&P 500.
Right, and when all is said and done, not a lot of moves here. The NASDAQ really the outperformer, but let's remember perspective, everyone. In terms of U.S. stocks, we're pretty much hovering near records, and we are when it comes to global stocks as well. And the Treasury market, that's going to be one thing we've got to talk about today, because that 10-year Treasury falling to the lowest in a month, Tim.
Yeah, it certainly seems like investors are kind of taking a wait-and-see approach to the inflation data that we get later this week. And, you know, Dave Wilson, stocks editor, made a really good point on our show earlier today when he said we're kind of in this lull right now when it comes to companies reporting. Tail end of earnings season, next couple of weeks, we're going to see the end of the quarter at the end of this month, of course, but then don't get too used to it because banks start reporting in just about a month.
Yeah, well, and before we get there, we're going to get CPI on Thursday, I believe it is. There's certainly a lot going on within the world of some of the inflationary conversations. And I think, Caroline, what really sticks out to me is as bond yields come down, big tech is usually the big outperformer, and we're not seeing that today.
We're not. We're seeing a little bit of a bounce back, some record highs being hit. But guys, I mean, we've got to talk about the fact that the action is in the small caps. The action is in the meme stocks. I'm looking at Clover Health, $13 billion in terms of being transacted.
What's that up now?
AMC,
wow,
also up. I mean, these are companies that are just taking over in terms of volume.
Yeah, and well, I mean, that's probably one reason why the Russell 2000 actually came within about 13 points of that all-time high, that stood since March 15th here. The S&P 500 at one point did actually trade above its all-time high as well. It's not going to close above it. 4,227 right now as we wait for these numbers to settle. That's relatively unchanged on the day. The NASDAQ composite higher by about 0.3%, 13,924. The Dow Jones Industrial Average looks like it's going to finish in the red fractionally, 34,600. And as far as your Russell 2000, if I could take you there real quick, 2343.75, I believe, is where we're going to settle at. That's up about 1%. Remember, that all-time high is at 2360, Carol.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to talk about those major industry groups in just a moment, but it really does feel like in this trade today that inflation concerns have calmed down. Taylor, you mentioned Thursday we're going to get a read on CPI. We'll see whether or not that ignites some of the concerns within the marketplace.
Well, you see that on a sector level with energy, the second best performer on the day. You're up 0.9%, by far the best performer up the year when you're up anywhere from 45 to 50%. Retailing is the other one that we're watching, 1.5%. And then, of course, technology, as yields have been coming down. Big tech typically benefits from a lower discount rate on those cash flows. We migrate lower for our radio audience. We're off anywhere from 1 to 1.5% on some of the biggest decliners. Tech's in there, food and beverage, utilities. A lot of those bond proxies and safe havens actually tend to be some of the underperformers today, Carol.
Hey, I want to talk about the overperformers or overachievers, if you will. And some of these are not household names, but Cassava Sciences. Check it out, everyone. It's a small biotech company. It is your top biotech company so far this year. It's up more than 900% and basically riding the tailwinds to some extent of Biogen and getting that FDA approval for its Alzheimer's drug. They have an Alzheimer's drug that they're working on. Keep in mind, they have no products on the market in the past 20 years. That stock was up about 2%. So watching that. Caroline, you mentioned Clover Health. That share post.
Wild.
I know.
Wild.
Like the social media frenzy on this one again. Chamath Palihapitiya, he is backing this health insurer company. And I got to point out, short bets on this company up around 36% of free float. But this stock was up 86% in today's session. Want to mention Wendy's. We talk about these meme stocks. We're going to get into it in just a little bit. Climbed to a record. It's kind of the new meme stock in town. Of course, we know it for its burgers and its fast food restaurants, but it's getting some traction on social media. Want to mention Amazon, some fundamentals, because the company coming out saying it's going to offer 6-month. What? Oh, fundamentals?
Those?
Remember when we cared about fundamentals? They're going to offer 6-month prescriptions starting at $6. So they're going after the uninsured, those paying cash. We saw Amazon up also in today's trade, up about 2%. Wendy's, though, up 26%, Tim.
Hey, Carol, you mentioned fundamentals. Investors certainly caring about fundamentals when it comes to Lordstown Motors. The company telling investors late today, just before the markets closed, that it needs more capital to complete the development of its EVs, get regulatory approval, and begin commercial sale, essentially saying conditions raise substantial doubt regarding our ability to continue as a going concern. Shares cratering this afternoon, finishing the day down more than 16%. The sell-off in cryptocurrency that we saw happen today, unsurprisingly, hitting crypto stocks as well. Coinbase down more than 4.6%. Riot Blockchain down more than 2.6%. CureVac on the vaccine front falling today more than 12.5%. This after a Reuters report said that the European Medicines Agency doesn't expect to make a decision on the approval of that company's COVID-19 vaccine before August, Caroline.
Meanwhile, what's also on the downside is, well, most of your currency pairs vis-a-vis the Bloomberg dollar index. We're going to go across asset now for our radio, TV, YouTube audiences. I'm looking at global macro movers, and on the FX side of things, it's generally a sea of red versus the US dollar, which closed up about, well, it's not closed obviously, but up 0.1%. The US dollar index doing well as we perhaps get a little bit of caution ahead of the inflation data that we have on Thursday. All eyes tracked on that. Will that be a concern? Dollar goes higher, British pound off by 0.2%, the yen off by 0.2%, but it's really the commodity-related currency pairs that did the worst. We see the Canadian dollar off by 0.25%. Let's go to commodities now, though, because I want to shine a light on what Romaine did so well at your general close of trading for, well, the WTI for the oil areas. Commodities, we saw WTI crude up 1.5%, but importantly above $70 when you got settlement at around 230. So clearly money once again focusing in on the demand, the appetite, the want to get driving here in the United States, the Chinese buying, money moving into commodities. It's a sea of green there. Meanwhile, it's also a sea of green when you look at sovereign bonds. Taylor, we go worldwide, yields coming down, particularly in the likes of Europe, Portuguese, Spanish debt off by about 5 basis points.
Yeah, you're seeing yields come down across the curve, Caroline. And so often, I know that we joke on this program, we talk about rate of change. We always do that on the way up. We never do it on the way down. What catches my attention is, yes, a 4 to 5 basis point move down in yields as we think about bond price higher, yields lower. Really, all of this inflationary comments have been, well, really put on the back burner. And Carol, I think what really stands out to me is it's days like today when all of a sudden inflation takes a back seat, and yet the implications for the Federal Reserve. We've had commentary from Bill Dudley yesterday, and then of course today Brian Sack, who is now with D.E. Shaw, who really, sort of changed the way that the Federal Reserve thinks and incorporates inflation into their data. He's saying that the 5-year break-evens are now at a point at about 250, where the Fed needs to really start thinking about this and thinking about moving.
Yeah, he's saying if there's further increases, this could be problematic, and that the Fed has to kind of think about it, maybe a shift in policies. We just had Eric Jackson on over at EMJ Capital. He runs a hedge fund out of Toronto, and he says, listen, the Fed has given us lots of language. They're on it. They're watching it. They're data dependent. Yeah. And so if something changes, we know the Fed can shift policies, right? That can happen in a meeting.
I think this interview with Sack is interesting. Obviously, he's a lot smarter than all of us, but when you look at that chart that we had on the screen for our radio audience, which showed that five-year rate here and the idea that it's risen. But when you go back, at least in the post-financial crisis era, we're still trending below where we were during that time. And there's a big question here that even though we've risen, the fact that we're still below that trend line over the past few years, if the Fed didn't move then, why would it move now? The mandates change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Hey, some stocks that don't seem to be too concerned at all with inflation are those meme stocks. We talked about Clover Health already, guys. And the fact that Wendy's is now considered a meme stock has me, Caroline, asking the question, okay, what makes something a meme stock? Does it just mean that it has like a rise that's completely disconnected from any sort of fundamentals, or does it mean that it's talked about in the Wall Street Bets forum? What does it mean? I mean, how do we define meme stock?
Check, check, and check, right?
Seemingly, it doesn't need to be a heavily shorted stock, because this is where Wendy's stands out.
Right.
Clover Health, highly shorted.
Yeah.
So too are the other, like, so the GameStops of this world, the AMCs, but not so Wendy's. Wendy's, there's much theorizing on whether it's just because, well, we like to talk about chicken tendies when you're on the likes of Reddit, and that's what you can get over at Wendy's. But this also more seriously, Taylor, speaks to what the Federal Reserve is doing.
Absolutely
cheap money,
not.
money moving into
It is all fundamentals, Caroline. It is the salad of the summer.
But you put strawberries in. What are you doing? Yeah.
But don't you ever wonder, like, think about these names we spend so much time on, and I understand why they're being talked about in these chat rooms, but when you look at them at the context of the financial markets as a whole, it's so minuscule, and it's interesting how much attention we've been paying on it, guys.
That the crowdsourcing, I think, of some of these trades is drawing a lot of questions. I mean, we were speaking with Jim Paulson of the Luthold Group a little bit earlier on the close, and he really raised this issue of how regulators would even approach this. I mean, when you go back, I mean, Carol, you know this, you've been covering this a long time. In the old days, if you had market manipulation.
What are you saying there?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. We're in the same age bracket, so slow down. But look, you know, you go back, it was a lot easier. I won't say easier, but it was a little bit different to sort of root out market manipulation. But when you have this type of crowdsourcing on social media, it's a lot harder to sort of corral this and find a villain to sort of, you know, pull out and prosecute. It's just not going to happen.
What is it that Ken Mola said? Like, this is someone who's been around, seen lots of market cycles, Taylor, M&A guy, but he's just saying, like, this is something you talk about with friends at a bar. You're having some fun.
They're now the top 5 holdings in the iShares Russell 2000 ETF. That's why we discuss them. They're in the top 5 weightings within the ETF. It is unbelievable.
Carol got really snippy when I
mic.
implied that she's been around for a while.
I know. I'm feeling
Experience.
a little cranky.
Knowledge.
Thank you so much,
Romaine's
Caroline.
going
We
to
are
the
so
timeout box.
glad to have you back here in New York. All right, that's good. That's going to do it for our cross-platform coverage on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg TV, and on YouTube. We'll see you again, same time, same place tomorrow, everyone.